you're on a constant treadmill. Your wages, your savings, you're on a constant treadmill. If you're not getting a 10, 15, 20% nominal raise every year, you're getting devalued. Like your share of the network is diminishing.
Hey guys, welcome back to Everyday Finance. According to Lyn Alden, they were able to maintain inflation below 50% throughout the entire period. This camp is not the worst by any means. Just picture yourself living and working in this environment for an extended period of time. Continuous cycle. Explain your wages. If your savings are not growing by 10, 15, or 20%, you may feel like you're on a constant treadmill. Receiving a small rise annually may make you feel like your contribution is not fully recognized, leading to a sense of diminishing value over time. It can be challenging to maintain your global purchasing power, import goods, and travel frequently. People travel to different places around the world, and it feels like everyone is always on the move. When conversing with others, it's fascinating how you feel like you're in two different worlds, and lots of things Lyn Alden discuss. So please watch the video to end, and share this video, and subscribe our channel Everyday Finance. Thanks.
During this chart period, there were literally dozens of countries that hyperinflated or had triple-digit inflation and therefore roughly hyperinflated, or had just non-linear currency resets. And so the fact that they actually managed to have under 50% inflation the whole time puts them not anywhere near the worst camp. And you can imagine living and working in this environment for this long. You're on a constant treadmill. Your wages, your savings, you're on a constant treadmill. If you're not getting a 10, 15, 20% nominal raise every year, you're getting devalued. Like your share of the network is diminishing. And then even if you are, your global purchasing power is very hard to keep up. Your ability to import things, your ability to fly around the world, travel to other places. And so everybody's on this constant treadmill. And when you talk to people there's this really interesting thing is that you're almost like in two worlds at once. You're in 2024, and yet I know, for example, the anecdote I like to point out is I know a physician there, and he stacks physical cash dollars that he buys in the gray market and stuffs them under his mattress or the equivalent. And that's his savings technology for liquid savings in 2024. And he's not alone in that. And he's actually lucky because he actually he's in Cairo. He has access to, cash gray market dollars. Many people don't. They're saving in Egyptian pounds. Many of them are unbanked and they're just getting constantly diluted. And when you zoom out, there's 160 different currencies in the world, and many of them operate similarly to how we kind of think of arcade tokens or casino chips. So for example, this is an Egyptian pound. There's very little I could do with this in New Jersey. All the moneyness of this is basically void outside of Egypt. There's nobody that wants this. It's very hard to get this off my hands. It'd be easier to get a gold coin or a Bitcoin off my hands for something than this. Similar to how a casino chip or an arcade token mainly just has value in or near the issuer and lacks significant salability outside of that kind of enforced jurisdiction. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of countries like this. And you can imagine, so in Africa, there are something like 40 currencies. And in Latin America, there's something like 30 currencies. And you can imagine in the United States, if every state had its own currency, the frictions that this would cause. So if anybody came to this talk from New York and they brought their New York dollars, they'd have to figure out what to do with the New York dollars. They want to go buy something in Jersey here. Or if they're a business and they're getting financing and they're raising New York dollars for their liabilities and their cash flows are denominated in New Jersey dollars that might fluctuate significantly compared to the debt they just took out. And every sort of conversion point comes with major fees. That's a reality that well over 1 billion people in the world, probably multiple billions in the world, face on an ongoing basis. And when we look at the domestic situation, it's not nearly as extreme as a developing market currency, but we have our own structural imbalances and questions when we look out into the future. So these charts just show the 50 plus years of US structural trade deficits in blue and decades of rising public debt to GDP in purple and projections. This is from the Congressional Budget Office for how things are likely going to be in the future. And in this system that we have, we think of it as a pretty steady state system. right? So in engineering terms, we think of a system as either stable or marginally stable or unstable. And when we think of a money system, especially those of us that live in North America or Europe or Japan, you think of your system as pretty stable. But underneath the surface, there are these imbalances building up significantly. And the same thing happened under the prior era of the system. So, for example, during the Bretton Woods era, you had a gold peg for multiple decades, but underneath the surface, the number of dollars tripled, and the amount of gold reserves backing up those dollars kept reducing.
According to Lyn Alden in this system, we consider it to be a fairly stable state system in engineering terms. When considering a system, we typically categorize it as stable, marginally stable, or unstable. This classification also applies when analyzing a monetary system for those residing in North America, Europe, or Japan. The systems may seem stable on the surface. On the surface, imbalances are accumulating significantly. Similar to what occurred in the previous era during the Bretton Woods era, there was a gold peg for multiple decades. However, beneath the surface, the dollar amount tripled, and the gold reserves supporting those dollars remained stable. Underneath the surface, there was a growing instability that ensured the system was compromised. It was not going to last forever, but it felt ordinary until it suddenly wasn't anymore. Let's back to the Lyn Alden interview.
So underneath the surface, you were having this growing instability that kind of guaranteed that the system would not last indefinitely, and yet it seemed normal until it wasn't normal anymore. And so in some ways, I think that many countries find themselves in a similar place now where things seem fairly stable. We can't imagine things significantly happening in the near term. But when you project these things out 20, 30, 40, 50 years, no one really has a great answer of what's going to happen. The Federal Reserve Chairman was just on 60 Minutes this past week, and he was asked about fiscal sustainability. And he said, it's a major long-term issue that it's a very difficult issue to work through. And so I bring up these examples just to show that where we are now has a lot of unsustainable aspects to it, whether or not you're in Egypt or dozens of other countries like it, facing the constant daily grind of very high inflation, currency debasement, bank freezes, things like that, or these more benign but long-term unsustainability questions here in developed markets around our money system. When we back up a second and think where we got to this point, when I look at the history of money, I separate two major categories. So one is physical money itself, and how technology changes what we use as physical money. So in a hunter-gatherer context, shell beads, for example, were very popular types of money. In Neolithic cultures, things like grains or things like small silver coins were very popular money. And when technology gets to a point, it starts to obsolete older forms of money. So for example, metal tooling and advanced fishing techniques and doing things at scale can severely devalue the usefulness of shells as money, for example. Things that used to be scarce in a certain technological environment suddenly become a lot less scarce in a more industrial environment. And in many ways, the history of physical money is kind of going up the stack in terms of finding the next scarcest thing, figuring out how to make more of it, going up to the next scarcest thing until we kind of settle on gold as a thing that even to today, we can't rapidly increase the supply of. And so that's kind of one path that money emerged in. The other one was how to make it more efficient. So I have on here transactions and settlements. Banking and bank-like entities have existed for thousands of years. And the two main roles, one was the provision of credit. That's been known for thousands of years. If you look at the Code of Hammurabi in Babylon, for example, there's rules about lending and things like that 4,000 years ago. But the other key thing that I think doesn't get enough attention is the physical movement, verification, and divisibility of other types of money. So for hundreds of years and stretching back thousands of years, not only did people want credit, they wanted to have efficient ways to transfer money over long distances from one city to another city. And if they're doing that on a regular basis, maybe they don't want a caravan of metals with them every time. It's got safety issues, it's got verification issues, it's expensive. And so over time, there emerged a number of technologies that simplified and made easier transactions. So I have here a bunch of analog examples are coinage, paper, bookbinding of paper, the printing press, and analog encryption. And an example that I refer to in the book quite heavily is the Hawala system. And that was the system that predated, when we think of banking, we often think of Italian city-state banking in the Renaissance, but prior to that system, there were a number of proto-banking arrangements. And the Hawala system along the Silk Road was one of the more widespread systems. And in that type of system, and this is just an example that can be applied in multiple regions, if you wanted to transfer money from one city to another city, you could go to your local money changer, your local hawaladar, give them gold, and they would give you a paper receipt or a messenger with a paper receipt. And this requires a number of technologies. They have to have a communication with another money changer in another city. They have to have ways to make sure that the paper can't be forged or copied in some way. And then you take this analog encrypted paper instrument, you bring it to another city, and you go to a hawaladar or money changer in the network, and you can redeem gold in this other network. And those money changers can, net transactions between each other and settle rarely under more secure conditions, while the transaction value can move very quickly. That's an early example of trying to solve some of the frictions of money. And then, of course, as we invented, digital technologies, so the bottom list there is telegraph, telephone, internet, digital encryption, and blockchains, we dialed everything up a notch.
According to Lyn Alden, banking and bank-like entities have been around for thousands of years, according to Lyn Alden. And their two primary functions are the availability of credit, which has been understood for thousands of years. If you examine the Hammurabi Code, for instance, 4,000 years ago in Babylon, there were laws governing loans and other matters. But another important point that Lyn Alden believes is overlooked is the physical movement verification and divisibility of other forms of payment. Therefore, for thousands of years, if not centuries, people have desired credit. They have desired effective methods for sending money across large distances between cities, particularly if they're carrying that out frequently. Perhaps they don't want a caravan of metal whenever there are concerns about safety. It is costly and has verification issues. If you learned something from this video, then please like this video and subscribe our channel Everyday Finance, and we will meet in next video. Thanks.